Today on the TMZ Podcast.
Welcome to the TMZ Podcast. Harvey Levin here.
Derek here.
Courtney here.
And Jason.
So we have some new information on Bob Saget. As you may have heard by now, the family is suing to prevent the release of, in particular, photographs of Bob Saget, and photographs not of the autopsy, because that would never be released, but photos in the hotel room where he died. And under Florida law, it's very possible they would release these photos because it's a sunshine law state. And that's why the family is trying to prevent that, because they don't want this on the internet. And there has been a lot of media attention, because there are experts now saying, it doesn't make sense. The injury was so severe. There is one expert saying that it's more consistent with either being hit by a baseball bat or falling 30 feet to the ground. So here's what we know. We have talked to people who have been involved in this. And the theory they have, that the authorities have in Florida, is that Bob Saget was getting into bed and the headboard was partially covered with material, with fabric. But there was a portion of it that was not covered with wood. And they think that he may have gotten into bed and slammed his head on the headboard, and that's how he. Now the problem
That
is
hard though.
Well, it's a really
Like,
late
that's-
night. Maybe flop into bed and
But
thinking
to
you're going
have
to hit
that
something
much
soft.
severe damage is
they do not know. They don't know for sure. Their theory is this. Number one, I can tell you because we just checked a few minutes ago. They are confident. I'm just telling you what they are. They are confident this was not foul play. That they say that he hit his head. I know that the autopsy report talks about him falling to the ground. That's not consistent with what I just heard. And I just talked to somebody who was involved in all of this. And that person is saying that the authorities believe that this was the headboard and that it was the wooden portion of the headboard. Bob Saget was a very tall guy, and he often hit his head, so it wasn't unusual for him to hit his head. But they think that he may have gotten into bed and either lost consciousness or shortly thereafter lost consciousness because he was under the covers. That's what doesn't make sense to me, that if he just got into bed and hit his head, usually you lay down
There's
and
You'd be
cover.
splayed out.
Let me ask you
Yeah.
a question, Harvey. Is the headboard theory simply speculation based on the fact that there's obviously a
lot of
concussed
trauma.
area,
Yeah.
trauma to the back of his head? Or is it? It's not. To my understanding, it's not based on anything of hair or particle samples taken from the headboard. It's just a theory based on the fact there was trauma to his head, and that's the closest thing.
100%. That is
Okay.
exactly right. They are saying that there's no way it could have happened before he got to the hotel. If he was, if it happened at the club. We remember he was performing,
Drove 2 hours,
and
yeah.
he drove 2 hours. They said he never could have driven with that kind of injury.
Okay.
So they believe it happened in the hotel. Their theory is it happened in the headboard.
They discarded the bathroom theory for now?
They
now.
They believe it was the headboard. Now, again, we don't know. They don't know, they say. And as a matter of fact, one of the things, there was no blood, and we're told that the authorities who discovered his body and took him had no idea he even hit his head. The theory was a heart attack. They didn't find the bruise until they did the autopsy.
So the photos aren't like graphic or anything, right? Because there's like no marks. They just want to
It's
keep
like
it
a
for
scene,
like privacy.
right? That's the type of photos would be the scene of the hotel room as they found it with Bob in it.
Right?
Yeah, presumably.
But it's not like horrific. It's sounding like it's like no one
No,
can
it's
see
not a
anything.
naked
So it's
body,
more
I
just
don't
like for privacy, and they don't want people to see him in his last moments.
I find it
'Cause-
really, really interesting, though, that nobody at the scene even saw that
Yeah.
there was a bruise. And, and again, I mean, the police are not going to handle him because, they don't know until they know. And once they find out he's dead, I'm sure they leave the scene, as
Intact.
intact as possible.
Yeah.
But it is just odd that this was such a severe wound. Their best theory is he either knocked himself out or very shortly thereafter, pulling the covers up, lost consciousness.
Right. And then so the family.
But I will say, that's different than he went to sleep and didn't wake up.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
very different.
Very different.
That's
yes.
very different. And I think that's what's interesting.
Now, the family seeking to keep these photographs private may just simply be they don't want sort of a voyeuristic.
No, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah,
It may
right.
not be because they're trying to cover up any sort of additional evidence.
I spoke to somebody connected to the
Yeah.
family and saying that's exactly what it is. They
Just
don't
a
want
privacy issue.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
want the kids having to
Got it,
see
got it,
their
got it.
dad laying in that bed,
Mhm.
and that's one of the things they believe Florida might release under the Florida laws.
Although I would worry that this would backfire on them. This is going to make a bunch of independent internet detectives who
make-
are still interested in the case try to find out information.
Well, they're
through other
already
means
they're
and speculate.
They're
and
already
theories.
doing it. There's one pathologist who says they should exhume the body and figure this out. Now, again, that's one pathologist.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, look, they ultimately are saying they don't know. It's a mystery. Their best guess is the headboard, and that's why I find it interesting and weird that when you read that autopsy report, they don't talk about the headboard. They talk about falling to
They
the
talk
ground.
about an unwitnessed fall. As
and,
well.
that's what's,
and,
like,
and the
so
fall doesn't make any
strange.
sense.
They don't, it doesn't match. Like, it sounds like so hard, like, to believe, like, for some reason. I don't know.
I like the bed theory sounds plausible to me
Yeah.
because you could hit your head so hard, get a little bit disoriented, and say, "Oh, I'm going to sleep it off."
But-
right?
'Cause,
If
like,
you're in
why
the
would the
bathroom and you have a
autopsy-
dramatic fall, you might call for help,
Yeah.
right?
To me, and obviously there's a lot of speculation here, but the how hard can you really hit yourself head on a headboard? I mean, think practical terms. I mean, theoretically, I suppose you could hit it incredibly hard. It's a difference in kind from the kind of head wound you would have if you fell in a bathtub while standing up, or certainly,
The only reason I
baseball
kind
bat
of
or whatever.
disagree with you, because I thought the same thing you did.
Yeah.
There was no blood. And it's like, if you really hit
I don't
your
know how to reconcile.
Oh,
those
well,
things.
I know, but what
Yeah.
I'm saying is it could just be one of those weird, you hit your head just at the right spot or the wrong spot, and it breaks those vessels and it causes the internal bleeding. But there was no blood found. I double checked
And
that
he's,
today.
He's also a large guy, so if you're truly flopping your body weight and you're somewhat large, you can hit with a lot of force, right? If you think
look,
you're hitting something soft and you just go into it.
But I just want to sort of a little bit of sort of Occam's razor here, right? The most logical thing is usually the correct thing. I've never met anybody who hit their head on the headboard so hard they were concussed by it. I've never heard that story before. Sure, it could have happened here. It just doesn't really make that much sense to me, to be honest with you. I don't care how tall he is. I don't care. It's 2:00 in the morning. He's exhausted. But the idea of we've all slept. We have friends who sleep all the time every night.
Speak for yourself. I've never slept.
Yeah. we know many people have headboards. Anybody ever heard of anybody flopping so hard
Well,
they were concussed by the headboard?
But
It's
here's
strange.
What, here's
It is
what
certainly strange.
But here's what you got to think about: that he came to the hotel, he checked in,
2 a.m. exhausted.
but he checked in and then went to his room. So, in terms of theories, look,
Something it had to be in the room.
I am assuming, and I don't even want to go there here, but I am assuming there's surveillance video in the hallways
Right.
because they have all of these
And
cameras.
the parking lot and anywhere
Well,
else.
So
and then,
I'm-
like, checking in, like,
And there
on
may
the
be an
counter.
attendant
Well,
there, and
what
if he
I'm
comes
saying
in holding
is,
his head. Yeah.
There's no evidence that anybody else entered the room.
Yeah,
If that's kind of what you're getting at, there's no evidence
It
that
wasn't,
anybody
but
entered
yeah.
the room. So whatever happened seems to have happened in the hotel room with Bob Saget alone. And then if you buy into that, which I think is kind of a logical thing,
Yeah.
then something did happen to him in that hotel room. And the only thing that makes sense is some kind of a contact with a hard surface that would have caused this kind of internal bleeding. I mean, I don't see how else you can look at this.
And I guess once you put him in the hotel room, the actual cause of the trauma, as long as he was alone, is irrelevant.
I mean, right, and that's the
you know,
best. It's their best guess, but
Yeah.
when we broke the story, we put in there about the headboard because that's what we were told.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it pivots to it was a fall into the autopsy. I made another call today, and that same thing came back about the headboard. So who knows?
It's so sad.
It's very sad.
It's
I,
weird.
I
I know,
worry
'cause
that the family is driving the mystery with this
Yeah.
move. But
Because at first it was kind of like, oh, he like died like peacefully in his like sleep. But now it's like,
no, it's definitely taking a
Yeah.
darker turn.
Okay, let's get into the Rust lawsuit now. I mean, we knew this was coming, and the husband and son of Halyna Hutchins they've now filed a wrongful death lawsuit, alleging not just negligence but recklessness, and suing Alec Baldwin. And we knew this was coming. And the issue is Alec Baldwin being sued as the actor who fired the gun, the executive producer, or both? And it seems that it's both.
I think it's both.
Wouldn't it be?
I think it's both because one thing that's interesting to me about this lawsuit is that it's extremely thoroughly researched. We saw a couple of the early lawsuits, which were still figuring out the facts. They've done their homework.
But Derek, I got to say, some of the original lawsuits I think are ridiculous because a lot of these are workers' comp things, and they're just going to be thrown out because they weren't filed properly.
Right.
I completely agree, and they were rushed. And this one has, when they gave the press conference yesterday, they had the full animation recreation of the event. The way they've laid this out sounds like they're blaming him for both because they've laid out all these safety protocols that they say were breached. And there's a laundry list. I mean, Jason and I were looking at these documents. There were something like 10 or 11 things that they said didn't go right. Not pointing. You're not supposed to point the gun. You're not supposed to
live ammunition,
have it live ammunition, and on and on and on. And they're saying each of these, when Alec Baldwin was handed that gun from David Hall's, they say he didn't verify. That was the word they used. He didn't verify that the gun was safe.
That's the
nonetheless.
This is the
That's
George Clooney theory.
This is the George Clooney theory that you always have to check. You're the last line of defense. If you're using the gun in the scene, you got to make sure it's safe. He cross-drew. Now, there's some open question as to whether his finger's on the trigger or just pulled the hammer back.
Well, they
think he pulled the trigger.
They think he pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
Now, remember, he did that interview where he said, I did not pull that trigger.
But the expert said in order for the gun to fire, the hammer and the trigger have to be engaged.
We had that expert on TMZ Live, the same guy that they're talking to, and he showed us the same thing. And he said that it could be a very subtle movement, a very light movement. But look, I mean, they are alleging that it wasn't just negligence, but they're saying that it was so reckless they should be entitled to punitive damages. And I think the reason they're saying this has to do with the complaints that people made saying it's unsafe, saying that there were 3 gun mishaps, and the unit manager, according to them, came out and said, screw that, it's awesome that which is a crazy statement, but apparently they've got this in text.
Yes. And on the day of the event, they say it was a real skeletal staff because there were some walk-offs over the safety complaints. They said a lot of people had left the set that day. And you remember, even in the recreation, there's only 4 people in that building when this incident goes down. So they're working with a skeletal staff. They say the safety protocols weren't followed. This lawsuit's going to be a problem, I think, for Alec Baldwin.
So we need to break these things down, right? Because we need to have, what is the link? What wrong act happened that actually specifically caused her death?
Live ammo.
So we have that somehow live ammo got from this lockbox,
which is the fundamental point.
Which is the fundamental point.
I don't know about that. I'll push back on that, but go ahead.
Into the gun itself. And that's one, and we believe that was the armorer's responsibility, and actually what she did was put the live ammo in. So there's
the ammunition supplier. A lot of people going after the ammunition supplier.
Now she might push back and say it wasn't me. I have a box that are labeled. What are the dummies or blanks, whatever they're labeled, and I just take out of that box. Now, others are going to come forward and say, well, you should check every bullet, but that's probably not how it's done. You pull out of a box, you assume that it's a dummy round if that's what it is.
But in the reenactment, they showed
you're supposed to look, and that's one of the things they talked about, which is that the dummy rounds look different than live bullets.
And they showed you, and they showed you 3 different ways that you can tell like the difference between them. So I feel like for all those ways to be like not even have happened,
but
it's a huge red flag.
I think though that's presumably on her. I don't think you're ascribing to Alec Baldwin the ability to decipher the difference.
Well, they're
between
also
a
suing
dummy
her.
No, but let me ask you a
round
question.
and ammunition.
There can be live ammunition on a set. It's obviously something that they're saying is a breach of protocol. Live ammunition doesn't kill a person until a bullet is fired, right? So if you're assigning blame to take it entirely away from Alec Baldwin,
nobody's taking it entirely away, but
well, a little bit you don't want to assign any blame.
But the big difference here between compensatory damages for the loss of life, which will be in the few millions of dollars, and punitive damages, which could be in tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, is did you act recklessly? And if you believe you have a dummy round because an expert has given you a dummy round and you fire that and it kills somebody, it's awful, it's horrific, but it's not punitive. There's no recklessness there unless you assign to Alec Baldwin the obligation to have checked that round.
Well, is the Clooney rule industry standard, right?
Clooney rule.
No, well, Clooney announced this rule. What if that's the industry standard and they get a bunch of experts saying?
I heard George Clooney say that. I think that can't be the case. And I've heard other people, there's lots of opinions out there, right?
What was it like when you were in Clear and Present Danger?
It can't be the case that every guy in a Marvel movie holding a gun is checking it, making sure that everything's fine. We rely on experts for that. And by the way,
but isn't that why she's
if you're relying on
but
Alec
that's why
Baldwin
she's suing all of them, right? Because she's suing for Alex the
it's a
trigger and
laundry
them
list.
doing it.
And
Yeah.
that gets into my next question. So a lot of people are being sued here for negligence, right? And a lot of the people who were responsible for the set. My question to you is, when they answer this complaint, are they going to blame part of this on Halyna Hutchins?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Are they going to say that there is at the very least comparative negligence on her part? I'm not suggesting it. I'm just wondering if that's going to happen.
Look,
to preserve it, if for no other reason.
Of course they are. And by the way, there are four people on the set at that moment. All of them are named, I believe, right, as defendants in this lawsuit.
There are a lot of named defendants, yes.
But among them are the four people who were actually present at the time.
Dave Hall's for sure.
Yes. Alec Baldwin for sure.
And then the director who was also shot.
And if they're all individually responsible, she must be as well for the actual firing.
That's going to be their argument.
I mean, the fact that she died, that's something. But we see this all the time.
The way it works. I mean, again, we have no idea. Just as lawyers, I think they're going to raise this issue. And the way it works in the law is that if somebody, I mean, I'm just going to give you a hypothetical. Suppose they end up saying that she is 20% responsible for what happened. What they would then do is they'd compute damages and reduce it by 20%.
Right.
That's the way it works in the law.
Right.
So I don't know, but it just seems to me almost inevitable if they're pointing to everybody else that the defendants are going to say, well, Halyna is also...
Without question.
Look, I don't want to be insensitive, but you can paint that picture already. You can say, this is the cinematographer who's blocking the scene. She blocks it in such a way that the gun is going to be drawn towards the camera. A safety protocol is to not have the cinematographer behind the camera for such shots. That's her call. She made that call. She stood behind the thing and she got shot. It's insensitive, it sounds like, but that's certainly something you can
very
paint.
insensitive, but here's the way to think about it. If the bullet had missed her and hit somebody else, she would be a named defendant, and she would certainly be found partially liable. So it's awful. Like I understand, we get how awful it is to say that she might be partially responsible for her own death, but that's the way the law works when you're trying to determine who pays what to whom.
And to your point, that bullet went through her and into Joel Souza. So if she's not sitting there, that bullet goes directly into Joel Souza. It's maybe a much worse injury.
This is interesting that there is still a criminal investigation, and they are now raising this in the civil case to the level that would open a door to criminal prosecution if they're right, namely recklessness.
Right.
Because if it's negligence, probably not, but they are alleging recklessness, which is why they're asking for punitive damages.
Right.
And that then dovetails with this criminal investigation.
Right.
I think you're exactly right. Gross negligence is a lot closer to recklessness, and those start to get very blurry.
And the big issue here is what happens first. Does the criminal criminal proceedings go forward? Because
there are none yet.
They haven't
filed. But the criminal rarely yields to the civil, right, Harvey?
No,
the criminal usually takes precedence over the civil.
Usually, they would hold the civil, deal with the criminal, and then go back to the civil.
Which is big because Alec Baldwin in this civil case it's gonna be hard for him to take the fifth. He would probably have to get up and testify, and he seems quite willing to tell his side of the story.
Whether he testifies or not, now they have the interview that he did, which essentially lays out his position, so that whether he testifies or not, they're going to use the interview.
Boy, and we talked about it at the time. Good God, man, what are you doing talking to the media?
I know, Alec Baldwin. I was just thinking that interview is going to come back on him, right?
Because in that recreation, they embedded his interview and showed how he said he pulled the hammer back while they're showing the and they showed the inconsistency already at the complaint stage. It didn't even take further than that.
Can we end on a lighter note?
Yeah, sure.
So we had Dr. Dre on TMZ Live on Monday.
That was so exciting.
It was great. And he was just fantastic. But I got to say, listening to how this thing went down and the fact that here you have 5 rappers and some of these songs have lyrics in them that were problematic for the NFL. Mm-hmm. There were very few things that needed to change according to Dre. There were a couple of lyrics in Kendrick Lamar's, in one of his songs about the police.
Couple swear words here and there.
Couple of swear words. There were references to a gang.
The top of every song was changed. Yes.
It wasn't a lot.
I enjoyed it. They've done radio edits before.
They've done radio edits, but
it's noticeable if you're a fan.
Videos, yes.
But I just thought it was really interesting. The thing I loved about Dre was before we went on, he was supposed to. We were supposed to do the interview while we were shooting the show at 11 o'clock. He needed another half hour, and we didn't shoot it until 11:30 because we wanted to put it at the top of the show, but we ended up putting it in the middle of the show because it was at 11:30. So when we did the interview, I said to Dre, I heard that the reason you couldn't go on at 11 was because you were dying to get a Whopper at Burger King because you hadn't eaten one in 2 months because you wanted to stay fit for the show. And here's what he said.
You know what? My trainer is going to be upset about this conversation, but yeah. And by the way, Harvey, it wasn't. I made a turn instead of Burger King. I went to McDonald's. There's something about those McDonald's French fries, man. So I'm like, I deserve it today. I'm gonna treat myself and go on a pig out today.
But I mean, who could blame him, right?
That's how you know.
I mean, who could blame him? But I just love that he talked about this.
There's something about Dr. Dre just breaking down on the way home and saying, or the next morning and saying,
Right.
God, I just need
he's
fries.
He's close to a billionaire now, or he's a billionaire, and he's so grounded still. He's still Dr. Dre. He wants to pull into McDonald's. I love him.
I love him too.
Well, if you saw the video, the house behind him is something else.
Yeah. He's a long way from his humble beginnings. Yeah.
You mean the castle?
Yes.
How does he afford something like
Oh my God.
There was basically a moat.
By the way, Tom Brady's old house. He bought Tom Brady's. Did you know this? He bought Tom Brady's house. This is the house that Brady took years to build. He lived in it for 8 months. Brady sells it to Dre. You know what Dre did as soon as he bought it from him?
What?
Gutted the whole thing.
Down to the studs.
Gutted the whole thing.
Does that kind of hurt if you're Tom Brady?
A little bit, yeah.
Right?
It's 2020.
What's the matter with you?
Right?
Okay, we'll see you Friday, everybody.